The film begins by showing a man named John. At that time, John is seen watching a video of his late wife that being tortured by members of a drug cartel, until eventually John's wife passed away. As a husband, John can only mourn and resign himself to the situation, especially since his wife's killers have not been caught yet. 8 years later, John returns to work as the leader of a special DEA unit after his trauma begins to heal. At that moment, John is assigned to siege a local drug cartel's house and retrieve $10 million. In addition to the core team, the DEA has also deployed a sniper and an undercover agent inside the house. Not long after, John receiving the signal and the mission finally begins. After successfully breaching the house, John's team manages to find the $10 million, which is the primary target of the mission. After that, they decided to wrap the money and flush it down the toilet. Unfortunately, one cartel member appears and immediately attacks them. Although the mission gets chaotic for a moment, the entire team manages to play their roles well. Without wasting time, John immediately orders his team to escape. While John and his friends go to the drainage system to retrieve the money they hid earlier. However, when they reaching there, the money was no longer there. At that moment, John suspects that someone had sabotaged their mission, which resulting the team are deeply disappointed because all of the team's sacrifices were in vain, especially since one of their comrades died during the mission. The next day, John and his team are interrogated by the DEA about the disappearance of the $10 million. Although there is no evidence, they are still accused of theft because there are no other suspects. Since being interrogated, John has been living his daily life under FBI surveillance. Because the DEA still considers John to be involved in the theft of money from the cartel's headquarters. However, John remains calm because he did not take the money. In fact, John even takes the time to make breakfast and share it with the FBI agents who are watching him. After going through his routine at home, John goes to work, where John has been reassigned as an administrative agent working at the DEA office. At work, John hears gossip from other officers who constantly bring up news about the money theft. Sometime later, John is summoned by DEA officials and receives good news that the FBI surveillance has ended. Additionally, John and his team are also cleared of any wrongdoing. Therefore, John and his team are officially reassigned to field agents. Shortly after, John goes to visit his team at their headquarters to deliver the good news. On the other hand, his team members are grumbling because they haven't been able to do anything for the past 6 months. At the headquarters, they vent their frustrations in various ways, some boxing, some getting tattoos, and others playing game console. When John shares the good news, they are very happy because now they can go back to action in field missions. Sometime later, they immediately start their first training session after 6 months of being stopped. Before starting, John checks on his subordinate named Lizzie. She has been dating another member, Canavar, who is a muscular bald man. In addition to having a boyfriend, Lizzie has also become addicted to drugs. Even though John warned Lizzie to stay away from drugs before being suspended. After that, John prohibits her from participating in the training until Lizzie recovers from drug addiction. But Lizzie insists because she can't wait to get back into action. Not long after, their training finally began, and before engaging in strenuous physical exercises, they decided to test the team's cohesion. After completing the training, John advised Canavar whose performance had drastically declined. Upon hearing this, Canavar mentioned that his performance was influenced by team collaboration because they hadn't been on a mission together for 6 months. Upon hearing Canavar's words, John gathered his team and asked them to trust each other, emphasizing that they were considered his family. So from now on, John requested that every member should not doubt each other. After that, John resumed leading the training, and this time all the members performed well because they trusted each other. That evening, John and the team went to a nightclub to celebrate their return to work, where they drank alcohol and partied. They also toasted to their fallen teammate who died during the siege of the drug cartel's house. After the party, Canavar had a conversation with John where he expressed his gratitude for being able to reunite with him. During his time as a DEA agent, Canavar always respected John as their leader. Canavar even regarded John as a father figure. On the other hand, 2 of John's team members engaged in a verbal altercation while intoxicated, causing them to lose control temporarily. However, they immediately returned to normal. After returning from the club, one of John's members fell asleep in a car. Upon waking up, he realized that the car was trapped on the train tracks. where he couldn't get the car to start or escape from the car. Eventually, the man met a tragic end after a train arrived and destroyed the car. Sometime later, John heard about the incident and immediately went to the place. Upon arriving there, John appeared visibly distraught after losing one of his team members. After that, John met a detective named Caroline who was tasked with investigating the case. At that moment, John was curious because the homicide detective was involved when it was just a traffic accident. However, Caroline explained that the death of John's team members was highly suspicious, so the police had to investigate the case thoroughly. The next day, Caroline visited John's house after his team members had no family to provide information. However, John and the other members were having a drinking session. Although it seemed odd, it was their tradition when a member died, as they didn't want to bid farewell with sadness. Upon seeing this, Caroline decided to return to the office and meet with John later. That night, after the event was over, John invited Caroline to talk privately and discussing about the tragedy that happened to one of his team members. At that moment, John told Caroline that all his subordinates were the best undercover agents the DEA had, so their appearances were more like gangsters than law enforcement officers. Not long after, John took Caroline to one of his subordinates' houses. But upon arrival, the place was eerily quiet with no signs of life, and the house was flooded with the blood of John's subordinate. After seeing the gruesome sight of John's subordinate's body, Caroline was shocked and immediately composed herself. Shortly after, the body of John's team members was taken to the autopsy room. It didn't take long for the forensic team to conclude that John's subordinate was murdered by being stabbed and disemboweled. Additionally, the forensic team found hair around the victim that possibly belonged to the perpetrator. And this hair was the only evidence that police had so far. The next day, Caroline instructed her colleague to inspect the car that was hit by the train because she suspected the same person was the perpetrator. On the other hand, John instructed his members to stay cautious, especially since two of their colleagues had become victims of serial killings. At that moment, John worried they might become the next victims. While discussing the case, one member suspected that the incident was related to the cartel and the $10 million missing from their mission. During that situation, one of the members seemed to belittle the murder, prompting John to reprimand them immediately. Shortly after, while others were staying safe, Lizzie wanted to leave the house to buy drugs. However, Canavar prohibited her from leaving the house afraid that she would becoming the next victim. Additionally, Canavar was angry because Lizzie continued to use drugs. During the quarrel, Caroline suddenly visited them. We wanted to look further information for the investigation. To assist the police, Canavar then showed photos of their murdered colleagues, who were killed by the drug cartel named Rios. According to information, this organization held significant power in Mexico, so anyone disturbing their business would be swiftly eliminated. After the explanation, Canavar suggested that Caroline stay away from the case because the murders were related to the Rios cartel. Because sooner or later, Caroline would surely become the next target if investigation continues. Unfazed by the risk, Caroline decided to continue her investigation. This time, she went to the forensic laboratory to examine the evidence. At that moment, Caroline was given a hair and fingerprints found in the victim's car. Without delay, Caroline immediately held an emergency meeting with prosecutors and police officials. In this meeting, Caroline concluded that the murder of John's team member was highly linked to the Rios cartel organization because they had been disrupting the cartel's drug business. To resolve the case, Caroline requested permission from the higher-ups to open the DEA case files, especially those of John and his subordinates. However, Caroline was asked to obtain written authorization first, even though this case was crucial and threatened the safety of many people. This made Caroline very upset that she decided to leave from there. As she was about to leave, Caroline was approached by one of the DEA agents who often mocked John. The man then told her that John's team members were not getting along, so it was possible that one of them was the killer. Although it sounded convincing, Caroline didn't want to jump to conclusions hastily. Shortly after, when she got into her car, Caroline found a suspicious flash drive, which contained a video interview of John when he was accused of stealing money by the DEA. After watching the video, Caroline immediately met with John. At that moment, John explained that he wasn't the one who stole the money, and he was sure that his team was being framed at that time, and until now, John didn't know who this person was. Therefore, John invited Caroline to work together and complete this mission until the end. Not long after, They both decided to visit a former member of John's team who might be the next victim. At the same time, the former member was relaxing in front of his house. But the man was suddenly surrounded by an armed group, and he had no choice but to fight them all. After the incident, John and Caroline arrived there, and they were both shocked to see the scattered bodies and blood. In addition to the body of his former team member, John also found the corpse of one of the perpetrators who had a skull tattoo. Upon seeing this, John was convinced that the corpse was a member of a world-class criminal syndicate. After dealing with all the bodies, Caroline obtained a video showing the brutal actions of the Skull organization. Not long after, Canavar came to visit her to provide some information, where he knew all about the Skull organization. Based on the information that Canavar has, the organization is called Cartel, a mercenary group from Guatemala. It turns out, for the past 10 years, the Rios cartel had been hiring them to kill people who interfered with the drug business in Mexico. Unsatisfied with this information, Caroline asked Canavar about John, whom she found very mysterious. Although it was somewhat difficult, Canavar tried to recount the dark past that John had experienced. 8 years ago, John and his team had undertaken a mission to escort a drug mafia from the Rios cartel to the high court in Mexico. Unfortunately, during the process, a police officer shot the mafia, and without clear reason, the cartel accused John of orchestrating the murder. In the end, the cartel hired the cartel mercenaries from Guatemala to kidnap John's family and tortured them to death. Since that tragic event, John had been filled with vengeance and went after the perpetrators. However, he couldn't find them, despite eliminating dozens of cartel members. Fortunately, John still had his team members who cared deeply for him. Thanks to them, John started to stop searching for his family's killers, and his mental health improved. At the same time, John suddenly appeared and startled him. Canavar then apologized for revealing such information to someone else. Meanwhile, Caroline expressed her sympathy for the tragic event that happened to John. The next evening, John provided information about the cartel mercenaries who had killed his team members. Not only that, John also provided fingerprint photo evidence and details of several cartel members. After gathering all the evidence, Caroline asked her colleagues to investigate the organization further, where they visit the laboratory to match all the evidence. And it turned out, the evidence provided by John matched the identities of the perpetrators. Without wasting time, they drafted an official detention letter and tracked down the whereabouts of the cartel mercenaries. Meanwhile, John and his team were waiting for Caroline's move because from the beginning, they had utilized her to assist in their revenge. Once Caroline had located them, John and his team started moving so they could act before the police arrived. At the same time, the police and FBI were also on their way to apprehend the cartel mercenaries. However, John and his team entered the location and began searching every room. At that moment, they found some immigrants smuggled from various countries. As they entered the back area, enemy forces suddenly appeared and a fight ensued. After a lengthy shootout, John and his team managed to eliminate the mercenaries. But when Canavar checked the bodies one by one, they realized that the enemies they killed were not cartel mercenaries but regular drug cartel members. Shortly afterward, Caroline's team and the FBI arrived at the scene, where Caroline was puzzled because John and his team were already there. Because of this, Caroline finally realized that John had intercepted all the information she had. The next day, a fisherman found a body in their net while fishing in the marsh near the house of one of John's team members who had already been killed. Without hesitation, the fisherman reported his finding to the police. When the body was taken to the autopsy room, Caroline and her colleague investigated the corpse. It didn't take long for them to discover a skull tattoo, indicating that the body belonged to a cartel mercenary. From all the strange events that had occurred, Caroline concluded that someone else had killed the cartel mercenaries and then pitted them against John and his team, where the perpetrator intentionally confused the police. On the other hand, John was lamenting his fate while watching a video of his wife being tortured. John watched the video to keep his sense of vengeance alive. At the same time, John received a call from the police informing him that the killers were not cartel mercenaries. Without waiting long, John immediately gathered his team at a certain location and informed them of the news he had just received. Upon hearing John's explanation, Lizzie became suspicious that one of them was the perpetrator. As a result of Lizzie's words, all of John's team members began to blame each other. During the chaos, Lizzie suddenly confessed that she had been having an affair with one of John's team members named Sugar. Upon hearing the confession, Canavar immediately furious, feeling betrayed by his own friend. Shortly after, one of John's team members named Grinder confessed to Caroline. It turns out, John's team indeed intended to steal the $10 million when they carried out the mission 8 years ago. However, when they went to take it, the money was already gone. According to Grinder, the person who hid the money was either of Lizzie, Canavar, or Sugar. Not long after, John also provided information to Caroline, where John said that he cared deeply for Canavar, Lizzie, and the other members, especially since he lost his wife and child. Until one day, John intended to provide for them by stealing money from the drug cartel. Unfortunately, that decision only made their team fall apart. Sometime later, Grinder, who had previously reported, came to see John. But as Grinder was about to say something, he was suddenly shot by a sniper. Where the ones who shot Grinder were Lizzie and Sugar. Luckily, there were eyewitnesses who saw the sniper, so John and Caroline immediately found out. Upon knowing the sniper's identity, John felt deeply disappointed by the betrayal of 2 members whom he had considered like his own children. Without wasting time, John went to Lizzie's house to apprehend her. While John was on his way, Lizzie returned home and got into an argument with Canavar because he had confiscated her passport. Before fleeing, Lizzie pleaded for her passport to be returned. But he destroyed it instead, just as Lizzie had destroyed their relationship. Unwilling to accept Canavar's behavior, Lizzie was forced to kill him. After killing Canavar, Lizzie placed his body in the fridge. And Canavar's body was found by John and Caroline after they arrived there. At that moment, John was furious and wanted to avenge Lizzie's actions. When John was about to hunt her down, she called him first. Lizzie then invited him to meet in a parking lot to discuss their issues, although John already knew she was setting a trap. Shortly after, John arrived at the designated parking lot and approaching Lizzie's car, but in the car he only found Sugar. Suddenly, Lizzie emerged from behind and shot at John. Fortunately, Caroline helped John, allowing him to turn the tables. After that, John and Caroline pursued Lizzie and Sugar who were trying to escape. After a long chase, Lizzie's and Sugar's actions came to stop as they crashed into a truck. As a result, Sugar died instantly while Lizzie was left critically injured. At that moment, Lizzie admitted that she was the killer who had wiped out all of John's team members. So all this time, the perpetrator wasn't from the Rios cartel or the cartel soldiers, as they were just distractions. It turns out, Lizzie believed that the $10 million she was after had been stolen by other members of the team. So Lizzie decided to eliminate John's team members. Surprisingly, John confessed that he was the one who stole the money. Upon hearing this confession, Caroline was just as surprised as Lizzie. John explained that he needed the money to pay off important people in Mexico to find the killers of his family. After revealing the truth, John immediately killed Lizzie. At that moment, Caroline decided to let John leave, even though John had committed murder. After that, Caroline didn't want to interfere anymore. The next day, John visited a senior Mexican police officer and bribed him with the stolen money. After that, the officer provided detailed information about the cartel members and the cartel soldiers, who were the killers of John's family. After acquiring the information, John finally reached the killer's location, which was a bar filled with mercenaries. Without wasting, John immediately took action. After eliminating the killer of his family, John calmly walked out and mercilessly slaughtered all the cartel members without hesitation. Eventually, John was able to exact his revenge. But unfortunately, John was also shot in the chest. After that, John sat among the fallen bodies, calmly smoking his cigarette. At that moment, John had given up and was ready to die. Even though John knows that he will not meet his family in heaven because he is a murderer. And the film comes to an end. Moral lesson from the story: if you flush your problems down the toilet, they might just come back to bite you on the butt. So, if you find $10 million in a drug lord's house, maybe don't treat it like a fancy toilet paper roll,